international arbitration in Singapore and London for the Petroleum Ministry and several individual and corporate clients. She has extensive experience in handling matters relating to various aspects of arbitration, companies law, mergers, acquisitions, winding up, etc. Conversant in handling matters in various fields relating to property, labor matters, writs, etc. She is a member of the Supreme Court Bar Association, Delhi High Court Bar Association, Saket Court Bar Association, Indian Council of Arbitration, inter alia. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us today. Now, I would like to request our founder, Mr. Zia Ansari, to welcome the speaker.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Very welcome. It was really an honor to.
I can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, ma'am. Very welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
It's really an honor to have you on the board, and we all seeks your blessing that all goes well, and it's really will be an enlightening session. Like we are having three enlightening session, and the person like you here to speak.
I hope so.
Yes, ma'am. It will go fine. I know. We are really waiting for your session.
We've had brilliant speakers before me, and it's very difficult to match any of you. But I'll try my level and try to take it forward from the topic that I've been assigned for today. And Mr. Ansari, I'd like that screen sharing option. Is it enabled for me? Can I do that?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, I have enabled you. You can share it. Yes.
Fair enough. I'll just take a minute to get a little. Okay. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. We got your score.
You did? All right. Excellent.
Yes.
I can't see it. How come? Yeah. Is it available to everybody on the panel here? Is it available to everybody who's in the meeting? Yes, wonderful.
Yes.
Excellent. So thank you, first of all, Mr. Ansari. It's quite lovely that you're organizing such sessions, and it not only enlightens the viewers and the participants, it also enlightens us speakers, because we get to refine our knowledge because we have to present it before you all. So the task increases, and the reading increases because of such workshops. So thanks to COVID, I think all our reading skills have revived, and we are now in a better position and probably better placed in certain topics where at least we've made our presentations so far. And you've helped me to know a little more about cross-examinations than I ever did, by organizing this and inviting me as a participant speaker. So thanks for that. And welcome to all the participants. Thank you for being here today. The area and scope for which I have been asked to speak is the recording of cross-examinations, then the powers of an advocate, and the powers of a judge. So these are obviously an intertwined scenario. And, let me start beginning with what is evidence? How is evidence defined in the Evidence Act? Definitely under Section 3, as we all already know. I'm sure some speakers must have mentioned it earlier as well. We have two kinds of evidence that the Evidence Act is recognizing. One is oral evidence, the other being documentary evidence. What is oral evidence? Oral evidence, by the very definition, and the word oral means the statement given by witnesses. All the statements that a witness gives in court, whether it is in written or it is through his speech, is called evidence. And what is documentary evidence? Definitely by way of documents, whether they are in the forms of physical documents or a very new introduction of electronic evidence, which is also now recognized as a very valid piece of evidence. So that is how the Evidence Act recognizes the concept of what is evidence. Now, it is said that a good reasoned judgment is behind a very clear and correct recording of an evidence. Very simple. If the evidence has not been recorded in a crisp manner, in the manner in which it is supposed to be recorded as has been laid down in the law, the judgment definitely will not be able to reflect the true case. or not be, the result would not be what it would have been had the evidence been crystal clear and recorded in the correct fashion that it was meant to be recorded as. So thus, a clear and correct appreciation, a clear and correct recording of evidence is a very, very vital aspect when the evidence is being recorded. The evidence is definitely the backbone of any matter. You have to prove your case, the other side has to prove their case. And that's where evidence and the recording of the evidence will play the main role, the most important role. So we come to section 138. What is section 138? Section 138 tells us the manner in which we will record the evidence. What will happen first? Examination in chief, followed by cross-examination. That is, your witness who has been brought by you will be questioned by the counsel from the opposite side. You will try to make your case, he will try to break your case. It's very simple. And then followed by recall or re-examination. Sometimes I will be discussing this more at length, but just a general sweeping comment. Sometimes the witnesses, once you are finished with the cross-examination, you realize that certain important aspects have been left. And that is where the scope of re-examination and recall of witness comes into play. Now, we are all aware, in India, what I think world over, we have two kinds of cases, civil cases and criminal cases. Now, both areas of either they being civil or criminal, much stress is laid upon cross-examination. Cross-examination is considered to be the greatest legal engine for the discovery of truth. It is said that cross-examination separates the truth from the possible falsehood of an entire matter. So that's the essence of a cross-examination. You just need to call out the truth, what is there, from the gamut of evidence, from the gamut of statements that have been made by the person opposing you. That is cross-examination. But that does not leave out the importance of examination in chief. After all, the case first begins from examination in chief. What is somebody's trying to say something?
No, ma'am, it's fine.
Okay, there was some audio interruption. Okay, okay. So we come to examination in chief. Now, examination of chief, it is often said that a good lawyer can make any evidence a fact and any fact a truth. That is the power and the skill a lawyer has. If you are a good lawyer, anything and everything under the earth is possible for you to be able to strengthen your case and to present it by the manner and the, I would say, a weapon called the evidence. If you have it strong, you can make your case. So what is examination in chief? That is where, when a person who has come to court with a grievance, we will deal with civil law first. When you come to court with your grief, with your issue, and then you present your case, that is called examination in chief. The plaintiff, the petitioner, he is the person who presents his examination in chief. Now, what earlier it used to be by way of oral evidence. The examination in chief also was recorded by the judge. He would listen to what the person who has come to court has to say and then record it. This was causing much delay in the entire process of handling a matter and the handling of evidence. So to overcome this delay, an amendment was introduced in 2002, where the concept of filing of examination in chief by way of an affidavit was brought into foray. Now, what is an affidavit? Let me first. We all know what an affidavit. Do we have lawyers in this group, or we generally have students?
And both. We have professionals also and the students also. And the people who are preparing for judiciary examinations also.
We have a lot of my lords here, possible my lords.
And 2 to 3 my lords already who are existing. They are my friends already judged, and they are sitting and they are very interested to take this session.
My God, now you've increased the performance pressure. So,
No.
so let me pay my regards before I start to the senior dignitaries who are here, and then continue. So what is an affidavit? The party who is in litigation would bring out his case on by writing, that is, he will depose. That's what we call in legal language. We depose whatever we have to write, whatever our case is, whatever it is made up of, on a paper, and we swear it. Everything that the case entails would be brought forth on a sheet of paper that we call an affidavit, which is a very vital document when it comes to evidence by way of affidavit in terms of chief. So you bring out everything, you state the relevant facts of the case, and you file it in court. Now, does the mere filing of an affidavit make it evidence? Interestingly, no. If I just go to court, draw out an affidavit, have it attested, and file it in court, it will not be considered as evidence unless you file it in court and the court accepts it and takes it on record officially and recognizes it as examination in chief, is when the affidavit is considered to be your examination in chief, not otherwise. Mere filing is no criteria that it becomes evidence. So one has to be very careful. It has to be taken and recognized and given full honor of it being your evidence that you have filed by way of chief evidence. One has to be very, very careful when one is drafting out an affidavit. One, you must be very, 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 very clear that you cannot file a false affidavit. Filing a false affidavit is a punishable offense. You can be hauled under the laws of the country. The screenshot here is the PPT slide is elucidating the sections under which you can become liable. You must never make false statements just for the heck of proving a case. One has to be very, very careful. One can be hauled up under perjury, and it is absolutely very, very vital that one has to just put the statements which are true and correct. But what more precautions do we have to take? The precautions that we have to take is the affidavit should contain only those statements which we know are correct firsthand. We have seen them happening. We have experienced them, not hearsay. We cannot build an affidavit on opinions. We cannot build an affidavit on hearsay, he said and I heard and so I write. That will not be considered affidavits. I know I'm digressing a bit when I'm talking so much about affidavits, but I found it really interesting that the way the courts have really given a lot of weightage. I would in fact like to read certain extracts of certain cases which I was researching about affidavits. There is a very interesting case, Padmavati Dasi versus Rasik Lal Dhar. This is beyond what is mentioned here on the slide. In that case, how a statement is to be written, everything was discussed by their lordships, and it was, I will just take 2 minutes and read it out. We desire to impress upon those who propose to rely on affidavits that provisions of Order 19 Rule 3 must be strictly observed, and every affidavit must clearly express how much is a statement of the deponent's knowledge and how much it is his belief. Grounds of belief must be stated with sufficient particularity to enable a court to judge whether it would be safe to act on it. So it also brings out the essence of the evidence in chief. Once you've given your affidavit, you have to, and you are bound to state very, very clearly that this is what my statement is, and this is my belief, and divide the two situations, how and why, to enable the court to be able to decide that yes, when I'm basing a judgment, when I am basing on judgment on this person's evidence, this much of it is
actually true because he has said it, and then of course bearing with the circumstances and many other situations, the court will be able to decide whether yes, this evidence that has been filed can be relied upon or not. Another very, very interesting case was decided in the Supreme Court, State of Bombay versus Purushottam Jog Nayak, wherein they talked about the essence of verification. I wonder how the slides are, yeah. Verification of an affidavit, the part which we are so casual about when we are swearing an affidavit, said to be true and correct to the best of my knowledge, all of that. But there is a judgment which completely clarifies how the verification should be, what is the importance. We wish to observe that verification of the affidavits produced is defective. The body of the affidavit discloses that certain matters were known to the secretary who made the affidavit personally. Verification states that everything was true and best to his best of knowledge and information. This can lead to rejection of affidavit. So, my dear friends,
One has to be very, very careful when one is swearing an affidavit, the body of the affidavit, the verification. It is a very, very responsible document to be filed in court and should not be played with. The manner should be respected. The way it is sworn should be respected. What is written should be respected and should be the truth at every cost. Now, at times, what happens is we do file an erroneous affidavit, not because purposely, but at times certain things are genuinely missing. In such cases, we can request the court to help to allow us to replace it, but it cannot be taken very casually. One has to request, and it will, if found genuine, the request will be given heed to, and we will be allowed to replace our affidavits. So this is the discussion on the affidavits, and then we come to the documents. There are documents which are filed in court and evidence. One must ensure that all the documents that a party is relying upon are filed in original. Photocopies really have no value in evidence, and their evidentiary value has been discussed time and again in various matters and not considered to be a valid piece of evidence. One has to ensure that not only those documents which are important to prove my case, if I am the plaintiff, but also certain documents which may be in my possession, but which are useful to the other side are filed. I cannot choose to conceal XYZ documents just because they go against me. I am to come into court with clean hands. And when I say clean hands, those hands should bring forth all kinds of evidence and then let the judge decide what is right, what is wrong, how it is to be differentiated, whether this piece of evidence goes in favor of the plaintiff or it goes in favor of the defendant. That is for the judge to decide. But we as individual, as the persons approaching court, must bring forth all facts in our possession, all documents in our possession before the honorable court, so that they can decide what the result would be, where the evidence will go, where the ultimate judgment will go and be based upon. So we come to manner of recording evidence. Now in civil cases, what generally has started happening is that we file the evidence by way of affidavit, and then the courts normally these days are appointing local commissioners. Now the local commissioners have the same powers as if they were in the shoes of the judge to record the evidence. Order 18, Rule 4, giving them the power to be able to take evidence by orders of the court. And then there...
On your panel, you might have a share where there is a share option. You have an option to disable the annotation. So disable the annotation. Nobody will be able to do all this.
I don't know who is playing with this. I'm quite interesting. What do I do?
When you go at the screen and there is a share screen option is coming, there only you have to disable the annotation. There is an option, disable it.
Disable. I'm sorry, I can't see it. Let me check. Disable attendee annotation.
Yes, disable this.
Oh.
Now no.
No, it's interesting. Somebody was taking out his artistic
And few people
thing
do this.
on my doodling on my share slides. It's all right, not a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, very well. Where was I? Yes, appointment of local commissioners. Now, why the appointment of local commissioners was considered was very simple. Absolutely clogging courts with so many cases that a judge possibly cannot do justice by taking evidence, which is a very long drawn process in a real world. It may consider that you have to do it in XYZ days, but it never really happens. Recording of evidence is the most time consuming task. Also, depending on the number of witnesses, every case has XYZ number of witnesses, 1,000 documents to prove, disprove. So the process of recording evidence by appointing a commissioner to be able to record the evidence. There's some problem with screen sharing, Mr. Ansari. I'm unable to screen share.
I mean, when we are having your this, but you are not able to screen share.
I'm not able to move ahead.
Okay.
There's some kind of a pen which has had. Oh wait, let me see. If
Now you just cross a notion mein. There is a cross participation.
I think yeah, I managed.
Yeah.
Not that tech savvy, so it becomes very difficult. Right. So generally, what the rules for appointment of evidence to be taken by a local commissioner is that he has to record all evidence and submit it in court within 60 days. The manner which is in which he will record evidence would be definitely the same manner in which court, that is a question answer form. The lawyer of the plaintiff will question the defendant's witnesses and vice versa, and the entire evidence would be written in question answer form, whatever the question is asked, followed by the answer given and his own observations. And once the entire evidence has been recorded, he will make a report and then file it in court. It is a very simple process followed. Now, the local commissioner definitely has to be provided with the entire case file. So every time a local commissioner is, who can be a local commissioner? Generally, those are retired judges who are appointed as local commissioners, or even lawyers of credence. They are chosen by the court. There's a list in court which enables the judge to decide which local commissioner. There's a particular fee. Generally, Order 26 or the Rule 16A, 16 in CPC, they decide all these modes of fee assigned to the local commissioner. The entire file of the matter is provided to the local commissioner, and then all the evidence, so that he can appreciate it as if he was in court. And it is after, once the evidence is recorded, he will file his report in court with the entire evidence backing his report and his own observation as regard the evidence. In fact, the commissioner has been, as I told you, has been given all powers to record evidence, including the demeanor of a witness. That is, how the witness was when he was answering, what his body language was. And it's not as if the commissioner is supposed to, or even a court is supposed to continuously write about the demeanor. No, that's not the idea of recording a demeanor of a witness. It is, if it is particularly shifty, particularly if a person is found to be given clashing answers and, you know, not very convincing in terms of his body language, or not very apparently seeming to be shifty, then the judges have the power to just write around their notings that, you know, this is the demeanor of the witness and this is what has happened. The entire it's kind of a narrative of the demeanor of a witness in their evidence. And even a commissioner has the power to give that in writing to the court, so that when the court is deciding and appreciating the evidence which has been written, it has a knowledge of everything, even the observations of a commissioner. A very interesting scenario these days, which is also in the cases that now that we have COVID, this becomes even more important, is recording of evidence by video conferencing. It will, in fact, gain a lot of value now that we are
possibly in the lockdown mode, or maybe when the courts are closed, and recording of evidence by way of video conferencing will definitely gain more and more importance and strength. So what is, how do we do it? What decided? In fact, it was a very famous judgment of Praful B. Desai, 2003-4 SCC, page 601. For reference, one must, I would suggest all of you to go through the judgment. It's a very interesting judgment where the concept of video conferencing was found to be acceptable even in criminal matters. While criminal matters are most sensitive as opposed to civil matters, because they are definitely dealing with a person's liberty. And then it was decided in absolute length by the judges, and it was decided that video conferencing was in fact an acceptable mode of recording evidence. Now, in criminal cases, there is one important criteria, in fact everywhere, that about recording of evidence, that is, the accused needs to be present personally. Either he is present or his pleader is present. As long as either of them are present, the evidence can go on. Otherwise, there have been various judgments where if the presence of the accused or his lawyer was not found, then that matter was remanded back, and it was ordered, a reappreciation of the matter was ordered. So this is very vital, and one must be very careful that the presence of the accused or his pleader should be there, especially in criminal in proceedings, because it is the issue of liberty of the accused. So what was decided and what was objected to in this matter was that the accused and the pleader in terms of video conferencing are not present. What the courts then decided was the aspect of presence. What is presence? And it was decided that presence is not only physical presence, but virtual presence is also appreciated in courts. When it means that the accused or his lawyer is supposed to be present, it does not mean physical presence. As long as in video conferencing, the presence can be sought virtually, they can also, as long as they can also be a part of that video conference where their evidence is being recorded, it is considered to be the right manner of recording of evidence. So this was a fine distinction. Even in civil cases, the concept of video conferencing was appreciated in the 20th Century Fox Film Corporation matter, where it was held that hearing of suit and examination of witnesses and recording of evidence, as has been contemplated by Order 18, Rule 4, from the words witnesses in attendance, are to be understood by a person being present, and it need not be physical presence. It can be virtual presence, presence through audio, presence through a video link, and the guidelines of how a witness should be there, how video conferencing should go on matters has been discussed in that case. Now, this aspect of video conferencing was found of great use, especially in matrimonial cases when it came to civil law, because most of the time in matrimonial cases, one of the party at times would be a resident of another country, forget another city, another country altogether, and to come forth and back became difficult. In such situations, video conferencing in fact gave a lot of ease of recording of evidence, where the person could approach the court there locally, or some arrangement could be made through, so that video conferencing of evidence could happen from that with the witness in the other country and the courts here. So video conferencing came as a great boon for people, especially in matrimonial issues where the witnesses were not there, and at least it did not stall the case for years together. Now, what happens? How do you record the video conferencing? You've had a video conference. What happens is the entire proceedings are recorded. Then they are shifted into a hard disk. Of course, the computer hard disk drive, they're also shifted into an external hard disk drive and attached to the records of the court. And then they become the permanent record, and they are archived, or whatever the process is, so that the evidence is always with the file and can be appreciated at any point of time. Now, Another whereas issues of course remain to be discussed where about video conferencing is what happens when a witness is being examined and he's being prompted. Now, for example, I am here delivering this lecture, but what if I'm actually being prompted by a person sitting in front of me, or somewhere which is not in your view? But those are the lacunas for which the lordship there suggested important cloud eye securities and using only secured links. But in practicality, I really don't know how much that was successful. But it is a necessary form of recording evidence now, video conferencing. In fact, now we are having all hearings in by way of video, so we cannot ignore this vital facility and this vital technology of video conferencing and video recording of evidence, which really has found its way in today's world. Now, what is when I had discussed affidavits, and I had also said that it has to be filed in a particular manner, one must also remember that when an affidavit is filed, the vital aspect is it cannot travel beyond pleadings. For example, if you have written XYZ in your in the suit that you filed in court, you cannot plead another Q in your affidavit unless that Q is a part of your initial suit or your rejoinder. You cannot plead it in the affidavit. But what is more interesting also is that the opposite side has to take this objection at the very first go, that this affidavit that has been filed by the plaintiff has traveled beyond pleadings and I have an objection. Now that objection is very important in evidence. While recording of evidence is important, but objecting to a wrong evidence having been recorded or being taken to record or being sought to be put on record by another side is very, very vital. At times you can just miss the bus if you don't take the objection at the word go. So once you realize that the affidavit has been supplied to you by the other side, it is your duty to carefully go through the evidence and see whether he is trying to fit in some matter which was not already brought in the pleadings of the case. And then if it has been because of any reason, absolutely bring it immediately, without any lack of time, without waiting for your turn to file evidence or the argument, to bring it forth and object before the judge that this pleading that he's been seeking to include in the affidavit is not a part of the pleading and cannot be considered by the court. Now, this objection would then be recorded, and then the court will choose whether to move forward or whether to ask them to replace the affidavit or strike it off. That would be the judge's prerogative. I have a lot of case laws which I'm tempted to discuss, but there is a judgment, Ramdeo versus State of Rajasthan, which talks more about how a judge should react to certain situations which he's faced with. And it says, a judge should not be haunted by the idea that there was no ruling or precedent to guide him in estimating from the material produced before him the evidence to admit from the relevancy for appreciation. The court can eschew, exclude, expunge, or strike or shun any irrelevant or inadmissible portion. So it's not necessary if something has not happened before or a new proposition has come. There is in no manner in which a judge should hesitate in bringing forth his view or his apprehension that this statement does not seem to be included, does not seem worthy of being included in this case. It's beyond the pleadings. It should be struck off. And just because there is no precedent, there should be no hesitation by a judge to be, excluding it, eschewing it, expunging it, rejecting it, striking it off. A judge is all powerful and he is supposed to act in the best interest of the judgment that he would be delivering post the evidence and the arguments. So we move ahead
These are some examples on the screen for modes of recording evidence. In CRPC section 273 states that evidence should be taken in the presence of the accused or his pleader, as I already said. And the statements, the magistrates record the evidence and they record it in form of questions and answers. In warrant cases, any officer of the court can record. But what is most important is that once an evidence is recorded in question answer form, there are very vital things one has to remember. One, whatever answer is being given should come forth on the paper that the court is recording it in. And secondly, once the entire witness statement has been given, the evidence has been given and brought in writing, one has to ensure that the witness reads it completely and then understands what is written and then put his signatures. Without that, and if for example the witness after answering all the questions decides to walk out of the court without signing the witness statement, that evidence is kaput, it is zero, it has no evidentiary value, absolutely. So one has to remember that once you have given your evidence in court, then you are entitled to that very day, before any other witness starts his examination, that you get a copy of that evidence, your client gets a copy of his evidence, you go through it, your client understands it, he understands that yes, what I had said is exactly what is on this paper, and then you put your signatures. Then when the evidence is considered to be completely recorded and accepted. A very interesting concept you will see eventually for those who are not lawyers and will eventually join the profession and will get into trial and evidence would be the concept of RO and AC. We all every evidence will have in the end written RO and AC. The words RO and AC stands for read over and admitted to be correct. Until an evidence is read over to the witness and admitted by him that yes, it is correct, it is not evidence. So these terminologies are the golden words for a statement to be considered in evidence: read over and accepted to be correct. Any statement not having these golden words will not be evidence, will not be taken to be my statement. So that means the essence of the evidence has been understood by the witness. He has accepted it, that yes, I have said it, this is absolutely what I said, this is what I meant to be said. And that is the concept of RO and AC. Now, while I was reading about cross-examinations, I came across a very nice case while in cross-examinations. It is whether a senior advocate was entitled to cross-examine a witness. This interesting proposition came in the matter of Saraswati versus Tulsiram Seth and others. I'll give you the citation. You can give it a good read. I'll just discuss it very cursorily here. It's AIR 1971, Delhi 110. It's a very, very interesting case wherein a senior advocate was appointed to cross-examine a witness. The opposite side came up with a very novel objection. He said that a senior advocate is not entitled to cross-examine a witness when the court asked. Why? Because he is acting. When he is cross-examination, he is acting, and thus he is not empowered. And the judge agreed with the lawyer, and then this eventually went in appeal. When they went in appeal, the entire matter was considered worth a very long discussion by the judges, and a very beautiful judgment came into effect, which I have just given you the citation of. And it was discussed whether cross-examination or examination in chief is called acting. Section 16 of the Advocates Act divides the advocates between senior designates and the rest of us, the advocates. And senior advocates, as we are all aware, are subject to certain restrictions. These restrictions are, they are not supposed to file their wakalatnama, and they cannot act. So it is very interesting. What we are doing in courts is we are acting and we are pleading. How are we acting? We are not, when we appear in any court, the definition is also there in the Advocates Act. To act means to file an appearance
an application in any court, tribunal, or any person authorized in the said section, either in person or by his recognized agent, advocate, or attorney. So the important vital rule decision in this court was whether cross-examination and examination of chief comes within the realm of acting or comes within the realm of pleading. Another vital case which discussed this was Shambhu Prasad Patel versus National Ryan Corporation Limited, where Justice Chagla had discussed this entire the case there and said, right of audience in court, right to address the court, right to examine and cross-examination are all parts of pleadings. Thus, cross-examination of a witness is not considered as act, but it is considered as pleading. And it was then decided that every senior lawyer is entitled to cross-examination, because when he is cross-examining, he is not acting, but he is pleading. I found this really interesting because honestly, I hadn't read about this case earlier, and I was very excited when I read. I thought I must mention it at this forum. So we can probably move on to the excuse me. Is anybody wanting to ask anything? I heard something. Okay, fine. We come to powers of an advocate. In this itself will also be included the kind of questions we can ask during examinations and the recording of examination. It's more comprehensive. As I said, all the topics are intertwined, so I can't take any topic in isolation. So let us see what is the power of an advocate who is cross-examining or examining. So one must remember that in an evidence, in an examination in chief, there cannot be any leading questions which lead to an answer. The question should not be such that would lead to an answer. Now on the slide here to your right are examples of leading questions, and on the left are examples which probably could have been the same questions could have been allowed to be answered in a particular manner and not allowed. For example, did you see him enter X's office and take a file? Now this is a leading question. It is actually taking the witness through the process that yes, and leading him to an answer. But when you see to the left, could you tell us everything you did that day? Now that is a very open-ended question. It could also be, I saw somebody take the file, I saw somebody not take the file, I was present in the office. That is not a direct question leading to the answer. So a leading question, if asked, should be objected to by a lawyer immediately then and there. And what is the beauty of an objection is that when you object, you have a right that your objection is noted by the judge. He makes and takes a note of your objection. Now, most of the time, there are times when the judge will not allow, but that is irrespective. You have a right to get your objection noted, whether it is, what is the objection, the reason why you're objecting to the question, and then whether it was allowed, if it is allowed, very well. If it is not allowed, then the court writes it disallowed, and then we can move ahead. At times what happens is one misses out to object your questions. And then in that case, what happens at times, it actually, many a times it amounts to missing the bus. You just, if you forget to object, the court does not, obviously the court is also not looking into it because you're not objecting into it. And then at times it is considered to be a fact as proved. He has said it, you haven't objected to it, there is no problem. And then it can go against you. And I'm sure the mistakes of evidence must have covered this aspect as well in the previous session. So here are the, amongst inter alia, a lot of powers that we as advocates have in terms of recording, in terms of the other person giving his evidence. We have a right to object.
That is, we can object to anything which is irrelevant to the case, anything which is found to be a leading question. If somebody, we can object to hearsay evidence trying to be passed off. What is hearsay evidence? Hearsay evidence, as the name is, it is not an evidence which I have seen. It is an evidence which possibly I have been told has happened. Somebody tells me that A killed B and I saw A killed B, and I write I saw A killed B because F told me. Now that is all through your hearing. I'm not a party to it firsthand. Of course, there are exceptions, but we're not getting into that today. But the vital is you cannot base your evidence on somebody else's vision or somebody else's knowledge or somebody else's thoughts. Your case has to be your own thoughts, your own knowledge, your own reasoning, not somebody else's. So if there is any attempt of basing an evidence on hearsay, it has to be objected to, and a lawyer has the right to object to such an evidence being sought to be brought up. Then the lawyer has to ensure that the language in which the evidence is recorded is accurate. Now, for example, your witness is giving his evidence in vernacular language, Hindi, Marathi, Gujarati, anything. He doesn't know the language of the court, which is English. So whatever he says is then translated in the court's official language, which is generally in English, in Delhi at least. And when it is translated, one must ensure as a lawyer that the essence of his answer does not change, that the translation does not change the meaning of what your witness was trying to bring forth, because he obviously is unable to converse in English and thus is unable to give his answers in English. But you as his lawyer have a right to see that what is translated brings forth the essence of what your witness meant. And as a lawyer, you can also ensure that under the evidence, it is written that this evidence was given in XYZ language and has been translated for in the court language. And that is your absolute right, that accurate language is used by the witness when he is giving, and the essence of his evidence is brought forth if it is translated, and it should not go against him. Secondly, if an irrelevant witness is brought in court and who is not at all entitled, I mean, there's no link between him and the matter, it's absolutely useless. Why has he been brought? It will only delay. A lawyer has every right to object to his being brought forth as a witness, to being put to examination, and him having to examine such a witness, because there's absolutely no need for that person to be examined in the gamut of affairs. Then demeanor of a witness, I think I mentioned it earlier as well. Demeanor of a witness is very important. How he is giving his answers, whether he seems shifty, whether he seems to be not untrustworthy. This is all more, it's more of the body language, it's more of a judgment, rather than you can't be able to study a demeanor. It is not as if it is written for you that XYZ has this demeanor. It's not a printed machine document for you. A judge can observe it. If a lawyer observes a demeanor, it is his right to bring the demeanor before a judge. And then if a judge is convinced that this seems to be shifty, I need to note this down. He seems to be giving different kind of answers. Earlier he said X, now he's saying Y, now he's saying Z. All of this come as a part of a demeanor. Or if he's getting angry, fidgety, for no reason losing, or maybe trying to delay it by constantly asking the lawyer to repeat his question, because that is a witness's right. That if you don't understand a question that is put forth by a lawyer to you, you can ask him to repeat that question any number of times, as long as you genuinely cannot understand it. However, certain witnesses are trained like that by their lawyers to do, go on asking questions to exasperate even the lawyer.
Like you cannot exasperate a witness, you shouldn't try to exasperate a lawyer who's there to cross-examine you, because at the end of the day we are all doing our part. So all such demeanors, if a lawyer notices, he has a right to bring forth before the judge, who has the right to after, if he's in agreement with the lawyer on this, he will write and get the demeanor recorded. Now, if there are repetitive questions, now for example, if you're accused in a matter and the opposite side is going on asking you questions, time and again the same question again and again after regular frequent intervals, then your lawyer can absolutely tell the judge that this question is going on being repeated, it needs to be stopped. Why is he going on asking the same question again and again? If your nose cannot be touched like this, you cannot touch it like that. You've got an answer, you should be satisfied with that answer. You are not allowed to go on asking it in some way or the other, unless the situation warrants. So situation definitely has a very vital role in evidence. But these are the broad guidelines where, you can work yourself through while you are, cross-examining somebody, or, your client is being cross-examined, what all you have to take care of. Similar is the case, what if the other side tries to bring forth photocopies? You have to object immediately. If an electronic evidence is not backed by a certificate, you have to object to bringing that statement by way of evidence immediately. You have to be very, very quick about this and very alert about such statements being used as evidences. Even contrary evidence, if they are trying to say X and they are trying to provide B as witness, and absolutely contrary statements, black and white, then you have to bring it to the notice of the judge. That is your duty, to bring it to the judge's notice that they are trying to give contrary evidence, and that has to be recorded. It's your right to be able to bring that to the judge and the judge to record it for you. Now, there are times when the witness starts giving an opinion. मेरे हिसाब से ऐसा होता है, मुझे लगता है, or I think it is. In my opinion, yes, since he went there at night, he was alone. It is quite possible that it is my opinion he would have done it. So that is also an objectionable manner of giving your evidence. You are not supposed to opine your opinion unless you are an expert and brought forth for that. Yes, your opinion is very important, but a normal witness cannot provide his opinions. His opinions hold no value in the court of law. So if you find that the witness is giving his opinions and the court probably is not able to is not taking its suo motu cognizance of it, you should bring it to the notice of the judge that he is giving his opinion. His opinions are not warranted in this court. Only facts are warranted in this court. So you as a lawyer, you have every right and every power that you give an objection of this, take an objection, get it recorded, so that if God forbid this particular judge does not entertain such an objection, maybe when it's right for you to appeal, this might be a very vital aspect which might find a bearing in the appellate court for you. It might work in the appellate court if God forbid it does not work in the trial forum. So that you must remember that it has to be utilized. Now, another interesting case while I was reading about what are the powers of an advocate was Aisha B versus Peer Khan Sahib, where certain questions were asked by the accused's lawyer and they were defamatory. And a case of defamation was filed against the lawyer by the lawyer of the accused, of the witness. And then it was then it came forth before the honorable judges, and it was eventually held that when a lawyer is asking questions on behalf of his client, then any statement coming forth from him cannot be considered as defamatory, because it is under instructions of the client. Unless you are able to prove that any such statement was made in a personal capacity and not under instructions of the client of the lawyer, is only when you can hold the lawyer up. Otherwise, the lawyer has absolute protection. That does not, of course, give him the right to go on asking defamatory questions to harass the witness. That is not your right. You cannot, as a lawyer, harass the opposite side, the witness, the accused, or any person that you are putting to cross-examination. But
yes, if you put certain questions, you have the protection of being instructed by the client and have absolute protection on that front, and can be relaxed and absolutely work on the instructions given to you by your client. Court, of course, can prohibit these questions. Courts can disallow any mischievous questions which are thought to be asked, any questions which can irk the witness and are seen. Apparently, if you see that the other lawyer is only asking questions to provoke your witness, to shake the confidence of a witness, then definitely you can object. If you find that your witness is being prompted by the other side, prompted by any other person, then you can take an objection. You have every right. If there are more than 5 witnesses, then only the person who is being examined will be in court, and presence of all other persons is not allowed in the court while your witness is being examined. This is for his protection. This is for the protection of the accused, especially in criminal cases where it is the liberty of a person which is at stake, and one has to be very, very careful on this. So while one person is being examined, the other witnesses should not nowhere be around him, preferably not in the courtroom at all, so that to avoid any negativity in the case. We then move on to the last topic, which is the powers of a judge. The name judge itself is so powerful that to discuss it is very interesting for me. So a power of a judge is all powerful, all pervasive, and one should say that we are definitely in the hands of the judge once we enter the courts. He is my lord, nothing but my lords, because he is the one who will decide where your case will go, what will happen, what will be the fate. And how will he decide is, as I told you, on the kind of matter that you have presented before him, the evidence that you have presented before him, the manner in which your witnesses have answered the question. He will be only able to appreciate all of that once it is done in the absolutely clear and correct fashion. There was a famous jurist, Burke, who said that a judge cannot be a mere spectator or dumb and mask-faced moderator when it comes to handling cases. He has to be sensitive, and he has to be very, very quick and assertive about how he perceives an evidence that is being recorded before him. He cannot get charmed by advocates. He cannot get swayed by a persuasive advocate or an ingenious counsel, because there are at times you have very brilliant counsels on one end and average counsels on the other end, but the average counsel's case is far more right. So a judge has to then remember and distinguish the counsel from the case. That is the first primemost responsibility of a judge, to be actively participating for adjudicating a case in the most righteous and best manner he can, as a human being, as a judge, and under the powers that have been given to him. Now, the powers of the judge start from Section 3 of the Indian Evidence Act, from the very beginning. All statements, Section 3, I think I read it earlier also, but I will read it again. All statements which the court permits or requires to be made before it by witnesses in relation to matters of fact under inquiry, such statements are called oral evidence. And what is the essence in this section is permitted by the court. So we cannot, from the very beginning, bring to court anything without the court's permission, and thus start the power of the judge. The judge is often considered to be the ears and eyes during recording of an evidence. Now, he will, as a judge, assess a lot of things: a demeanor of a witness, his body language, his look, whether he's looking harassed, whether he's looking confused, whether he's shifty. That is all that he will assess. He will check, he will consider, he will conclude. So he will check whatever is there. He will consider what has happened, what
what was the evidence, what was recorded, what was the argument, what are the backing, what are the case laws, and then finally conclude. So 3 C's: check, consider, conclude. The powers of a judge, they start right from the very beginning. Now I already told you that the judge can always order an affidavit of evidence to be replaced if he deems fit, but that is happening only in very, 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 very rare circumstances and not as a very casual approach. Section 165 of the Evidence Act confers very vast powers on the court to be able to ask any question he pleases in any form at any time to any witness about any fact which he considers relevant to the case. So he can at any time, any form, ask any questions to any of the party, any of the witness he likes. He may also order discovery of any documents which he feels right in a case, order that such documents be produced before the court so that the evidence can be properly appreciated. And no party, if the court orders XYZ documents to be produced, XYZ witness to be produced for examination, no parties can object because he is doing it under his power. And why is he exercising the power? Is to discover the truth of the matter. That is very simple and has been appreciated in time and again, dime a dozen judgments, that he has the most persuasive, all prevailing power when it comes to evidence, much more than any other person who has brought that witness. Important judgments which have been considering this aspect, you can probably take a note of them, is Ramchandra versus State of Haryana, 1981, 3 SEC 191. There is a case of Zahira Habibullah Sheikh versus State of Gujarat, that is 2004, 4 SEC 158. These discuss the powers of a judge under section 165 in great detail. Now, in CRPC, the similar power is given under section 311. 311, I will take the liberty and read the entire section to you for you to be able to appreciate it in its entirety. Any court may, at any stage of any inquiry, trial, or other proceedings under this code, summon any person or witness or examine any person in attendance, though not summoned as a witness, or recall or re-examine any person already examined, and the court shall, the word shall is very important, summon and examine, recall or re-examine any person if his evidence appears to be just, essential for the just decision of the case. As you see, section 311 is very interestingly divided into two parts. One is a discretionary part, the other is a mandatory part. The discretionary part is a judge has a discretion to call anybody as a witness in a case. That is his discretion. And what is the mandatory part? He has no option, but if you tell him that this person is important for this case and his evidence, without his evidence, we will not be able to do justice to the case. You will not be able to arrive at a just decision. This is important for your appreciation of the case. He is bound to. There is no option. He is bound to call that witness. This is where his power to recall a witness, to re-examine a witness is also entwined in this section. If he thinks that for a judge, an essential outcome of the case, re-examination or reappreciation of this witness is important, he has the power to bring forth that person into the witness box yet again. Now, there is in civil cases, the Supreme Court has dime a dozen times laid the stress that any witness can be recalled. There is not an issue in recalling and reappreciating or re-examining the person. However, it should not be if you want to fill a lacuna, if something was missed, and now you feel that, oh, I should put this to be able to to be able to strengthen my case. Those are not the situations where you will be able to allow any re-examination or recall of a witness. Order 18, Rule 17 of CPC also give powers to a judge to recall a witness for clarification. Now, once he's appreciating the evidence, once he's reading, if he feels that yes, there is some clarification that is needed, he has the power to suo motu go on calling. He can call the witness and put questions, whatever he wants to clarify, and then answer them accordingly. It is often, it's section 151 of the CPC is often used to recall a witness, but it has been held by the Supreme Court that it should not, that inherent power of the court should not be taken so loosely that it should be used as a routine procedure to recall witness. This was discussed in Vinod Seth versus Devinder Bajaj, 2010 Supreme Court. Absence of an express provision in the court and the recognition and saving of inherent powers should not be treated as a Carter branch to call any relief. What it meant was that if it is meant every inherent, just because there is an inherent power, it does not mean you can go on using it to the extent of misusing it and using it for the slightest excuse to bring forth and get yourself to do something which you could not do otherwise. You cannot use inherent powers of a court to do it. So it is absolutely a judge's wisdom, his own appreciation of the case, his own situational judgment of the matter, where he will decide whether a judge should recall a witness, should re-examine a witness, what should be the peculiar circumstances in which the witness should be cross-examined. What in criminal cases especially, it is said that discovery, vindication, and establishment of truth are the main purposes of underlying objects in the courts of justice. It says that when a judge is given such wide power, he will have equal responsibility to be able to see that such powers are not arbitrarily used, not used just for the heck of, going ahead and putting the accused behind bars or maybe filling up lacunas. It should not be used. It should only be used if the judge really feels that yes, recalling such a witness, reappreciating this, re-examining this witness will definitely help in understanding the case a little bit more and helping me to arrive into a just decision. Now, there are certain principles that case laws have brought forth, that the Supreme Court has brought forth, that give a power to a judge. What are the principles a judge should really, maybe broadly at least, consider before he arrives to recall a witness, re-examine a witness? It is said that courts have laid down whether a court is right in thinking that it needs the new evidence. So a judge should really be very, very sure that yes, this evidence that the party is trying to introduce now at this stage, or this recall of witness who has already been examined, who has already been cross-examined, is being brought, there has to be some requirement of that new evidence. Why? There are situations where it has just been discovered. What does a party do? It will definitely ask for re-examination or taking it on record. At that time, a judge has to apply his discretion, his skills to see whether yes, and appreciate that evidence, because the case is before him. He can easily decide whether yes, this is being done in a frivolous manner or it has been done in a genuine manner. Then it is said, power of section 311 should be resorted with only to obtain truth or obtain proof of facts which lead to the just appreciation. It is also said it cannot be the power to fill a lacuna, like I already said.
Now, for example, you miss out something. You just can't go to the court and, oh my God, this is not helping my case. Let me add something more. Let me just try to fill in this lacuna either by proving, getting a witness who will say a certain things more, which really won't do much about it. So the judge has to reject all of this. He cannot be allowing it to fill a lacuna. But a very interesting concept was, what is lacuna and what is a genuine mistake? At times, a lawyer can definitely make a mistake and not introduce a witness or maybe a piece of evidence, which due to absolute maybe a lapse, just missed his attention, and the evidence could not be brought forth. What should the judge do then? Should he be refused or should he be allowed? It was held that in such a situation where there has been a lapse or a mistake by a lawyer about some evidence or something which has been genuinely brought forth, he should be allowed, because in that case it cannot be considered a lacuna. It was said that this was the case of Rajendra Prasad versus Narcotic Cell, where it was said that a lacuna in prosecution cannot be equated with an oversight committed by a public prosecutor. In this case, when the witnesses were being examined, a whole chunk of 2-3 witnesses was missed by the prosecutor and they were not examined at all. And later on, he went to seek permission that this has been missed, kindly it may be allowed. And objections of lacuna were taken obviously from the side opposite. But in the interest of justice, in the interest of just decision of the case, it was allowed. In fact, there are guidelines given to judges that one has to be very magnanimous when one is looking into a request for recall and re-examination, especially in criminal cases, because the liberty of the accused is at stake. So one has to not be closed about it, but be open. Look into why this application has been made for recall, for re-examination. What is the new circumstance? What is the lapse? What is the mistake? Why this evidence needs to be improved, and whether it is required. Really important for the decision. And if the judge feels that yes, it is important, it might save the accused, or it might nail the accused, or it might pin him, any reason, but that will be the just decision which he has to arrive at. That requires magnanimous approach by the judge and not a closed approach. It is said that the judge's role is definitely not to harass or to be very strictly conforming to whatever is given in the book. These discretions are only given to judges to be able to use them as magnanimously as possible while remaining in the realm of just decisions. When they feel that they will be able to arrive, by virtue of being judges, they are considered to have the capacity to be able to deliver justice. It is assumed that they have been given such a high pedestal where every litigant is going with the confidence that he or she will get complete justice irrespective of what has happened to him in the past. Now he will get justice before this court, before this honorable judge, and the judge has to honor the confidence that the lawyers bring before him, that the parties bring before him, and should act very, very magnanimously, yet within the realms of discretion allowed to him, within the realms of whether the evidence that is being sought to be recalled, to be brought forth, to be re-examined is really important and should allow it in that circumstances. I guess that is about it. And I think I have been able to cover mostly everything that I wanted to say.
No issue, ma'am. And we will be opening for our session will be open for
Can I
questionnaire.
see a few people, because I am absolutely talking to myself so far.
Ma'am, there are so many people.
No, I'm sure they are, but I would love to see all of them.
Yes, ma'am. People will now raise their hand and they will be asking question directly to you, so that you can feel there are so many people listening to you.
No, it's just that it's nice to talk to people.
Yes. So Ayushi, I'm unmuting you first. Ayushi, you can ask the question.
Ma'am?
Ayushi.
Oh, sorry. How do I? Is the screen sharing still on, Mr. Ansari?
Yes,
can you stop, please?
Yes, ma'am. I will do that. I will do that.
Hello, am I audible?
Little bit, yes. Not completely, but just a little more louder would help me. Yeah, but tell me. Yes.
Hello, good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Hello. Ma'am, I'm a student and I had a few questions. As the first, are the documents provided?
Dear, your voice is breaking a lot.
Ayushi, you can do one thing. You can write the questionnaire and I will ask to the ma'am. Right?
Yes, sir, no problem. I'll do that.
Anyone else want to ask any question? Please.
How do I go about this? Yeah, on the chat.
On the chat box, or I will be unmuting ma'am every time, and they will directly ask me question to you.
Acha, okay, fair enough. Fine.
So one question is from Pushkar ma'am. This is asking: are these commissioners who record evidence generally knows as registrar of the court or not?
No. They're not registrars. They can be lawyers. It can be me also, for that matter. It is that they are ex-judges. Registrars are appointed. Yes, there are joint registrars also. But the commissioners can be anybody. They can even be.
Another question is from Saurav. Saurav, I am unmuting you. You ask the question from ma'am directly.
Yes.
Saurav.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Hi, Saurav. I can't see you, Saurav.
Ma'am, their videos are not on. You can only listen.
Oh, okay. Hanji, Saurav, please.
Yes, yes, ma'am. I have a question regarding the leading questions.
G.
Yes, ma'am. So, why is the leading question allowed in only cross-examination? Why not in examination? I mean, this is a very basic question, but I don't know exactly what is the reason behind this.
It is very interesting because you cannot prove your own case. You cannot tutor your witness. It has to come through the witness. While in cross-examination, you will not be asking questions which will lead to his acquittal. You will be asking those questions to serve your purpose of incriminating the person.
Another question is from Preeti. Preeti, I'm unmuting you, please. You can ask the question.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Hi, Preeti. Tell me.
Yeah, I like your sparking smile first. I like to compliment you.
Thank you.
My question is regarding under section 311 CRPC and section 165 Evidence Act. Is the transfer of any magistrate or judges affect these all process?
No, absolutely not. The next person steps into the shoes as if only. Are you still continuing to speak?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Hanji, sorry, please boliye.
No, I'm with you. I'm listening.
Yeah, no. Any judge's transfer, any judge's promotion, any new judge coming does not affect. That is the reason of recording the evidence. That is the idea why evidence is written. Everything is written down. The proceedings are noted. Day-to-day order sheets are noted. That is the idea. Because nothing, including the posting of the judges, nothing is permanent. We see it every day. You start your evidence and you with one judge, and at times you conclude it after three judges. Before, three judges have changed in the interim. Doesn't happen before commissioners, of course, but yes, judges change, magistrates change, but it does not affect. The evidence will not be changed. You will not have to re-examine your witness simply because a judge has changed. That is no reason.
If suppose the one magistrate have own opinion on that particular, अगर judges का magistrate का अपना opinion हो एक magistrate का और वो posting चला गया, now the another magistrate came और उसका opinion अलग हो, like opinion देते हैं, कई बारी उनके अपने inherent power होते हैं, उसे ठीक नहीं लगा, उसको गलत लगा, then इसमें affect नहीं करेगा क्या?
Definitely करेगा. That is why we are at their mercy. That is why they are my lords.
Okay. But nowadays we are away from this my lord things.
Even then they are, sir.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Another question is, Naman, please ask the question.
All right. Thank you so much, sir and ma'am. And ma'am, such a great lecture. Thank you so much.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
So I would like to ask a question on. Again, I will mention my one experience. Yeah, so the last time, in the last lecture, I asked to Kapil sir, and I would like to quote that. I participated in one mock trial. I cleared to the finals.
Okay.
And in the finals, I was doing cross with the accused.
In a mock trial?
Competition, yeah. So I was crossing the accused.
Okay.
So after the finals, the KTS Tulsi sir was the chief guest. So he said, you should not have cross your accused. So ma'am,
क्रॉस हाँ
should
आपने अपने ही अक्यूज को क्रॉस एग्जामिन किया
yes ma'am, yes ma'am.
वो
So
तो नहीं
should be or should नहीं हो सकता?
नहीं आप अपने विटनेस को until वो hostile ना हो जाए what is a
हाँ,
hostile
हाँ.
witness a person who is now against the case he's your witness but he is what is the concept of a witness you know every side both sides are supposed to file their list of witnesses and what is the idea of list of witnesses it is to prove your case to strengthen your case now you bring x number of witnesses they will further your case their role is if I have said Ram Ram has usurped Sham's land now everybody who comes from Ram's side will try to prove no it is Ram's land and everybody from Sham's side will say no it is Sham's land but if one person from Sham's side comes and says no it is Ram's so he turns to be hostile it is generally in criminal cases I'm giving you a civil view of it since I'm more of a civil lawyer so he will give a view of absolutely different from what he is then he is no longer your witness and you are supposed to cross-examine at that time so now you're accused if you intend to cross-examine your accused means you believe that yes he is the accused but as an accused's counsel you cannot cross-examine him you will carry his evidence in chief he will be giving techniques to save himself you will only cross-examine a person when you want to who you are against you cannot cross-examine your own witness unless he is against your client or the entire story that you are bringing forth you understand that
Yes.
Okay ma'am, thank you ma'am.
Is that clear? I am surprised your college didn't help you on this it was quite startling which college
Ma'am, I was just I'm in second year, so yeah.
That is all right. It is okay. But I'm sure your seniors should have helped you. The idea is examination in chief, cross-examination, recall, re-exam. Chief is of your own witness, of your own side. Everybody is on two sides, na? A side, B side. जितना आप अपने side का witness cross-examine नहीं कर सकते. You can ask him questions, but not in a manner of cross-examination. That is only for the opposite side.
Okay, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I will keep in mind.
Yes, good luck to you. Keep on winning. You reach the last stage, which is great.
Yes, ma'am. Without that, you must not cross your own accused.
You can't cross your own accused unless he is against your case. Then he turns a hostile witness. Then karo cross-examination.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Next question is from Rohini Arora. Rohini, please, you can ask the question for ma'am.
Yeah, good afternoon, ma'am. I have a question on admissibility of evidence, especially like WhatsApp chats and SMS chats, screenshots. Are they admissible in court as evidence?
Now they are increasing. As of now, we don't try to give WhatsApp shots and all. They have only persuasive value. But whether their admissibility, now courts' views are changing. Even the view of very recently WhatsApp services have been allowed that if you can serve the other side on a WhatsApp message. So now the courts are becoming more proactive, especially after this video scenario is on. And now in today's date, yes, eventually there will be evidence. You'll have to, but then a lot of proving procedure. It's come from that phone. It is not maneuvered. All of that will become. It's not great piece of evidence, but it's not completely disallowed.
In an examination in chief, we gave the WhatsApp chats.
Sorry, come again, please. I'm sorry.
In the examination in chief, we gave the WhatsApp chats and screenshots. The opposite party kept opposing it, but the judge said, "Okay, you can mark it as an exhibit."
There, got your answer. Opposite side has to object. No, that is the job of the opposite side.
No, but that does that mean that the court is going to take those documents on record?
Have they been exhibited?
Yes, marked exhibited.
At
Yes.
the last stage, it will be decided. You'll have to show me the evidence for it. I'll have to go through it and see what exactly has been said.
Because the judge was allowing, and they kept saying that an FSL has not been done of the phone, so of the mobile phone.
Is it required to do an FSL? I haven't really gone through that aspect yet. Is it required?
Not very. She said no, no need.
There's no need. Then she's taking it on evidence. She's taking it on record.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Next question is from Sumed. Sumed, you can ask the question from now. I'm unmuted. Sumed Sawant, please. Let me unmute him first.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Hi, Sumit. Tell me, please.
Thank you very much for such an enlightening session. My question is, how can you lead a very good circumstantial evidence?
For that, we'll hold another seminar.
Okay.
Too long a discussion. Let's not keep it here. We'll hold another seminar very soon for that.
Yes, ma'am. Another question is from Ayushi, ma'am. Please, Ayushi. She has written. Ayushi has written that please explain electronic evidence and the document that it has to be supplemented as you mentioned something related to certificate.
Yes, there is a certificate which is required under Section 65 stating that I am in possession of this machine from which the electronic evidence has been culled out, and that provides the now, for example, there are bank statements, there are various mails, etc. So one has to give a certificate. Unless that certificate is given that the machine or the hard disk from which the evidence has been that I have printed is in my possession, that evidence is not considered electronic evidence. There are various very I forget the name, Anwar is a case law which is very vital on this aspect of electronic evidence. You must go through that. Somebody wants to take the screenshots. Okay, sure. Wait, I'll have to. Okay, just give me a moment.
We will be sharing the PPTs with these people. We will take your PPTs and.
Okay, you want me to share it again, right?
Ma'am, we will be sending that. You just mail us. Or you can
want me to mail the PPT?
Yes, ma'am. You mail us our PPT so that we can share with all the participants.
Achha, sure. I'll mail you. No issues. Sure. Wait, where am I?
Another question is. Okay, I will do that. I will exit for you.
Achha. How is it? Yeah. Ji.
Another question. What you can light upon it, video conference.
I can't hear. Sorry.
What is the new manner to do cross examination through video conference?
New manner. There is no new manner. It will be the same way as if it is being recorded in courts. The only thing is now you now physically at the moment the courts are closed. But I assume, for example, if it'll be as if the judges, like you are sitting before me, Zia, you will be. For example, if you are the judge, I am the lawyer, and then there'll be a witness. There'll be a link given. All three of us will join, or four of us will join. And then it will be through video conferencing. The mode and manner will not change. Questions will remain the same. Answers will remain the same. Yes, in terms of signatures, I'm sure they will come up with a format where the copy of the evidence will be shown on screen, like shared screen, and would be accepted. Screenshots will be shared. All of those modalities will definitely change. But the sense of recording evidence cannot change. That cannot change.
Yes.
It has already been happening. It's nothing new. It's not कि अभी lockdown की वजह से it will start because of COVID. Evidence, especially in matrimonial cases, some parties are in US, the woman is here, the man is
juvenile cases, POCSO cases, we see this.
And nothing will change. The basic tenets, the basic principles, the basic objections, everything will remain the same. It's only about how to share that evidence, all of those things. Maybe now, if if the bulk of such evidence increases, they will come up with a way. Otherwise, nothing changes. Just because it's a video conferencing, no aspect changes.
Okay. Anyone else want to ask any question from the ma'am? Please may raise their hands, or they can drop me a chat box message. Ayushi, I'm trying to unmute you again if you can.
Are
Yes.
the documents procured via RTI? RTI is a document itself. One can take judicial notice of it. It's a legal document. You cannot prove an RTI. Only a person who has sent that RTI can be summoned, and he can be asked, yes, did you write this? He will say yes or no.
Yes.
That way you can prove that document.
And the certified copies of the document procured from various government departments.
You can call the persons if you want to. Otherwise, if the court is taking judicial notice, it's all right. But if you find not disbelieving, you can summon them. For example, if you're filing a passport, then you can call the passport officials to prove that yes, it was issued by the passport agency. Your birth certificate, similarly your ration card. All of these, the government departments. The department comes, they have a cross register where they have issued these documents. In RTI, if an RTI is sent to you at the response, that will be recorded in government records in a register. So that person will come with the register, show that yes, this RTI was sent by me. It is not a forged document. To the extent of it being forged, you can easily call and prove it. Not an issue.
Ma'am, and the conclusions pertaining to the demeanor of the witness, are they to be recorded in the evidence?
Sorry, my dear, who is this? And I missed the first two words.
Ayushi, please come near to the mic so that we can hear you.
The demeanor of the witness, that is
demeanor. Are you talking about demeanor?
Yes, ma'am. The demeanor.
Okay.
The demeanor of the witness that has been conclusions pertaining to the demeanor that have been made by the judge.
I can't hear.
To be recorded.
Yeah, you'll have to tell me. I just can't hear what she's saying.
Ma'am, I've sent it.
I'm just repeating her question. She has written also, so let me repeat her question, ma'am. She's saying, should the demeanor of witness that has been concluded by the judge be recorded in the evidence which is subsequently signed by the witness if the conclusion pertaining to the demeanor first appear in the judgment of the judge and the judge has laid a great significance on the demeanor? Okay, then what is the conclusion?
I didn't understand this question.
I also don't understand the question demeanor, basically what she is trying to ask.
What you're wanting to ask.
If it is recording of demeanor, of how demeanor is to be recorded, we can say.
How demeanor is to be recorded? That's how it is. It's just a statement. I mean, an observation.
Exactly.
Now, how he records it is
his wish.
I'll have to become a judge and then I'll let you know.
Well, another question is from Prachi. She's asking. She has written here. Can a witness remain present?
Ideally, no. It's supposed to be only. It biases a witness. At times, threatens. At times, the other person can prompt or get an idea of. You must, as your, be cautious about this. I should have mentioned it. I forgot. Thank you for asking. You must ensure that all the other witnesses are out of court. That your questions. There are times you're asking the same questions to 10 witnesses.
Yes, exactly.
So then you should ensure that no other witness but the one you are examining and the one who is important to you is there. That's it. Other witnesses and you're right to ask them to step out. No two witnesses are there ever examined together.
There only, ma'am, we close this meeting and I wish you to join us at 3. That is a concluding part of our today whole lecture. So Sanjay sir will be there. I have requested Kapil sir also to join.
Okay, sure.
I request you to also to come on the board so that these people can directly discuss with all these 3 dignitaries at a time so that they can have more wide.
Okay, sure. Of course, that will be my pleasure. All right. So I'll see you guys at 3.
Okay, ma'am.
And this little PPT was, I would thank you, Zia Judicials, for inviting me. And I just want to acknowledge my office, this Gurjot, Vaishnavi, Vitika, and Vishal, who've helped me with the PPT. If they are here,
thanks. PPTs are very wonderful.
Yeah, that's all because of my little team in my office who is online at the moment. So I really want to thank them. They've done a wonderful job for a technologically unsavvy person like me. So I really want to thank all four of them. I hope they are here and they are able to listen to me. And thanks to you and to all the people who joined this presentation. I hope that we are going back learning something from each other. Thank you. And we'll see you again at 3 then.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.